Welcome to the reading of the Sabbath School lesson for the second quarter of 2022. Welcome to lesson number 9 in the series on Genesis, titled Jacob the Supplanter. It's ready for teaching on May 28, and my name's Percy Harold. Tuesday, May 24. The Deceiver deceived. Read Genesis chapter 29, verses 1 to 30. How and why does God allow for Laban's deception? What lessons did Jacob learn? Genesis 29, beginning at verse 1. So Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, My brethren, where are you from? And they said, We are from Haran. Then he said to them, Do you know Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. So he said to them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Then he said, Look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. But they said, We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together, and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. Now, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice, and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative, and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then it came to pass, when Laban heard the report about Jacob his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, Surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in to her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went in to her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban said, It must not be done so in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for service, which you will serve with me still 7 years. Then Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also, and Laban gave his son Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years. The first thing that Jacob sees when he arrives at the place of destination is a stone, perhaps a hint referring back to the stone of Bethel, which signified God's presence, as we read in chapter 28, verses 18 and 19. Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it, and he called the name of the place Bethel. but the name of that city has been Luz previously. It is this stone that will, after all, give Jacob the opportunity to interact with Rachel. When Jacob hears from the standing shepherds that Rachel is coming with her sheep to water her flock, he urges the shepherds to roll away the stone. They refuse, which gives Jacob the opportunity to do it alone, and to introduce himself to Rachel, which he did in verse 11. Rachel responds by running to her family. This first contact between Jacob and Rachel was productive. Jacob loved Rachel, it said in verse 18, so much that the 7 years he worked for Laban in exchange for Rachel were like a few days, we read in verse 20. However, after these 7 years, Jacob is deceived. On the night of the wedding, it is Leah, the elder sister, and not Rachel, whom Jacob discovers in his bed. Taking advantage of the confusion of the feast and of Jacob's intense emotion and vulnerability, Laban had managed this trick. Interestingly, Jacob uses the same root word for deceive in Genesis 29:25 that Isaac had used to characterize Jacob's behavior toward his father and his brother in chapter 27, verse 35. But he said, "Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing." Note that the same thinking also is implied in the lex talionis, law of retaliation, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, of Exodus 21, verse 24. And we'll compare this with Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. This forces the culprit to identify with his or her victim, in that the culprit faces what the victim did. In a similar way, then, what Jacob had done to someone else had now been done to him. Jacob understands now what it means to be the victim of deception. Ironically, God teaches Jacob about his own deception through Laban's deception. Although Jacob, as deceiver in Genesis 27:12, knows well what deception means, he is surprised when he is the victim of deception. Genesis 27:12. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself, and not a blessing. Thus he asks the question, "Why have you deceived me?" in Genesis 29, verse 15, which shows that he knows deception is wrong. So to finish the day, though Jacob was the deceiver, he himself was the deceived. How can we learn to trust God when we don't see justice being done, when we see people who do evil get away with it, or when we see the innocent suffer? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind, and It Is Written. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. Remember, God is always faithful.